every baby has innate intelligence, with new abilities to learn and information to process arriving in stages until the mid-20s. Although it initially comes as a surprise, every young child eventually realizes that what she understands to be true is not necessarily the same as what other people think. How she knows what she knows is a story of a child's cognitive development, along with emotional, social, and moral reasoning abilities. The big picture of how a child develops from birth through adolescence comes full circle in this lesson. So, today we're going to discover how we figure out our place in the world. We will also answer the question, are children's mind and computers the same? And we will also discover the uses for different types of attention and memory. Lastly, we will discuss sensitive periods for learning one or two languages. In a time when children were viewed as passive recipients of knowledge, JeanPierre Jay saw that children always and everywhere are constructing their own ideas of how the world works. He explained a child's cognitive development using new concepts such as accommodation, assimilation, and equilibrium. With this threefold process, he demonstrated how children come up with mental schemes to organize their reality. They then take in new data and change their schemes to fit. The practical implications of these ideas have led schools to incorporate processes of discovery and self-interpretation into how they teach everything from math to history. His theory focuses not only on understanding how children acquire knowledge, but also on understanding the nature of intelligence. So, with some modifications and revisions, Piaget's four stages of the cognitive development are still regarded as the foundation of how children think and learn. To review, the stages are as follow. During this sensory motor stage, which is the earliest stage of cognitive development, infants and toddlers acquire knowledge through sensory experiences and manipulating objects. Children learn about the world through basic actions such as sucking, grasping, looking, and listening. Moreover, infants learn that things continue to exist even though they cannot be seen, a concept Piaget called as object permanence. By learning that objects are separate and distinct entities, and that they have an existence of their own outside of individual perception, children are then able to begin to attach names and words to objects. In the second stage, called the pre-operational stage, children begin to think symbolically and to learn to use words and pictures to represent objects. Children become much more skilled at pretend play during this stage of development, yet continue to think very concretely about the world around them. At this stage, kids learn through pretend play but still struggle with logic and taking the point of view of other people. They also often struggle with understanding the idea of constancy. For example, a researcher might take a lump of clay, divide it into two equal pieces, and then give a child the choice between two pieces of clay to play with. One piece of clay is rolled into a compact ball, while the other is smashed into a flat pancake shape. Since the flat shape looks larger, the pre-operational child will likely choose that piece even though the two pieces are exactly the same size. Lastly, children at this stage tend to be egocentric and struggle to see things from the perspective of others. While children at the concrete operational stage are still very concrete and literal in their thinking, they become much more adept at using logic. The egocentrism of the previous stage begin to disappear as kids become better at thinking about how other people might view a situation. Concrete operational thinkers begin to understand the concept of conservation, that the amount of liquid in a short, wide cup is equal to that in a tall, skinny glass, for example. While thinking becomes much more logical during the concrete operational stage, it can also be very rigid. They begin using inductive logic or reasoning from specific information to a general principle. Kids at this point in development tend to struggle with abstract and hypothetical concepts. Kids in the concrete operational stage also begin to understand that their thoughts are unique to them and that not everyone else necessarily share their thoughts, feelings, and opinions. Lastly, the formal operational stage is the final stage of Piaget's theory, which involves an increase in logic, the ability to use deductive reasoning, and an understanding of abstract ideas. At this point, people become capable of seeing multiple potential solutions to problem and think more scientifically about the world around them. The ability to thinking about abstract ideas and situations is the key hallmark of the formal operational stage of development. The ability to systematically plan for the future and reason about hypothetical situations are also ethical or rather critical abilities that emerge during this stage. It is important to note that Piaget did not view children's intellectual development as a quantitative process. That is, kids do not just add more information and knowledge to their existing knowledge as they get older. Instead, Piaget suggested that there is a qualitative change in how children think as they gradually process through these four stages. A child at age 7 does not just have more information about the world than he did at age 2. There is a fundamental change in how he thinks about the world. One area of Piaget's theory that researchers have re-examined and revised is the consistency of children's performance in these four stages. Some studies show that children gain certain cognitive abilities at the appropriate age, but they may often revert back to a previous stage for a particular task. For example, a child of 7 years in the concrete operational stage should be able to watch water being poured from one container into another and understand that it is the same amount of water even though the new container is a different size or shape. In the Piagetian view on this so-called conservation task, the child should not fall back into pre-operational thinking and assume that merely by changing containers the water is any more or less. When the same child looked at another task using the same logical structure as the conservation task, in this case, the idea that two people looking at three mountains in the distance should both see the same scene, the child should perform similarly as he did in the water containers. If he misses the first task, he should also miss the three mountain task. However, researchers have found that children may use pre-operational thinking in one task and operational thought in another, even when similar thought structures are involved. Children also may jump ahead of a particular task to the next cognitive stage and display abilities that are ahead of schedule. According to Piaget, children younger than 6 or 7 cannot solve conservation problems because they do not yet understand reversibility. This is a cognitive operation that allows them to discover physical attributes such as mass or volume. Neither did he believe that they possess the needed logic to enable such tasks until they reach the concrete operation stage after 6 years. Current thinking differs from Piaget's view of rigidly differentiated stages of children's thought processing. It's now understood that just attaining a particular level of reasoning does not mean a child will always reason at that level. Researchers have shown that children can be trained to use the concept of conservation as young as 4 years old. Recent research has focused on the ability of some children to hold more schemes in their memory at a time. This, researchers say, accounts for the ability of some to jump ahead to higher levels of reasoning and others to fall behind. A wealth of additional new research conducted during the past 3 decades has added to and refined many aspects of Piaget's cognitive learning theory. The term theory of mind refers to the intriguing question of what concepts children hold about their and other people's thoughts. In other words, theory of mind is an important social cognitive skill that involves the ability to think about mental states, both your own and those of others. It encompasses the ability to attribute mental states, including emotions, desires, beliefs, and knowledge. For example, when do children begin to understand that each person thinks different thoughts, or the realization that they don't know what the other person is thinking? This is the terrain of beliefs, desires, and consciousness. Pretty heavy stuff for a discussion of preschoolers and kindergarteners. Before getting lost in a rubric cube of possibilities, let's use what is known about the stage of cognitive development to help narrow down the answer. Here's a classic question used by researchers to test a child's theory of mind. George put some chocolate in a blue cupboard and goes out to play. In his absence, his mother moves the chocolate to a green cupboard. When George returns, he wants his chocolate. Where does George look for it? The cupboard, which cupboard does a 3-year-old say George will open? Egocentric 3-year-olds says the green cupboard. Why? Because they know that that's where the chocolate is. Never mind George. What about a 4 or a 5-year-old? The slightly older child who plays or who displays what is called a belief desire theory of mind will say the blue cupboard. This reflects their understanding that beliefs determine behaviors. So George will look in the blue cupboard because, not having seen George's mother move it, that's where George believes his chocolate is still located. In the last two videos, you saw that that as children mature, this ability to put themselves in another perspective is of crucial importance in their social, emotional, and moral development. One persistent criticism of Piaget's 4 stages of cognitive development concerns its lack of attention to cultural factors in a child's life. Those that hold this view believe that culture not only affects the rate of cognitive maturation, but also how and what children think. Rather than viewing cognitive growth as a self-directed process where children function almost as if they were isolated scientists, learning is seen in an outgrowth or rather as an outgrowth of children's social interaction. The original proponent of the social cultural view of cognitive development was the Russian child psychologist Lev Vygotsky, who was a contemporary of Piaget. He held the view that cognitive development was not universal. Instead, that children develop those cognitive skills that demanded by the values and needs of their unique culture. The aspect of Vygotsky's theory that holds the most interest for psychologists today is his emphasis on social historical development. This is the study of how changes in culture, values, norms, and technologies shape how children think and learn. For example, they ask how the seismic shift in the communication system of industrialized countries such as radio, TV, computers, tablets in the last 50 years has changed children's thinking. Related research focus on such questions as does access to keyboard, joystick, and digital screens at the pre-concrete operation ages of 3 and 4 change when and how a child understands such concepts as conservation. What about the theory of mind? With this technology at her fingertips, does the child come any sooner to an understanding that each person holds separate thoughts, or might it delay such a cognitive epiphany? As time goes on with an increasing number of gadgets and processing speed at a child's early disposal, the opportunities for research will grow exponentially. Now, the focus of the social cultural approach to cognitive development is on the relationship between the child and a more skilled partner who guides and encourages her to learn. Vygotsky's term for this, though dense and technical sounding, gets right to the point. With the phrase zone of proximal development, he marked out the range of tasks that are too complex for the child to master alone. But with the help of a more knowledgeable partner, they can be learned. This area sits at the middle of what the child can do, their current knowledge and skill, and what the child cannot do currently, which is currently beyond their reach. In other words, ZPD is the gap between what the student is currently capable of doing independently and what they can do with support. How does this work? In part, the child learns by internalizing the problem-solving techniques of her partner. After this process of internalization, she will have those skills to draw on independently. It also has the ability it has also been found that younger children who engage with older children and adult in symbolic pretend play advance in those cognitive skills faster than children who don't. Were you the younger sibling who played and learned from an older brother or sister? What are the skills you might have learned through that play? Children learn about people, objects, and actions through symbolic play. A direct relationship has been found between the amount of cooperative social play a child engages and her later understanding of people's feelings and beliefs. So the question is, what does this mean for the 21st century teacher? Now, the zone of proximal development is a metaphor. It's a way for us to think about how we push our students out of the zones they are comfortable in, but not really learning anything new, and into a zone that is beyond them. This, or to use another metaphor, it's getting the child who rides a three-wheeler into a two-wheeler. They cannot do it yet. It's ahead of their current development capability, but if we put the trainer wheels on the two-wheeler, or get out get out there with the child to hold the bike steady while they try and ride, and pick them up after they fall and set them back up again, they will learn to ride a two-wheeler bike. So then we take the trainer wheels off and we step back. So students working in the ZPD significantly increase their development, but they cannot be there alone. They can work in the space because of the presence of a more knowledgeable other. That can be a teacher, a parent, a coach, a peer. Now, scaffolding, and even other learning materials. If we set the learning task too far past the student and do not support them, they enter the panic zone and they cannot engage with the learning. That's the child that just look at the three-wheeler, then at the two-wheeler and says, "No, I can't do it now." And they are right. They cannot do it alone. So the ZPD is a supported zone where we move students from where they are comfortable but not increasing their development to the space where it's a bit beyond them, but with guidance they can be challenged into development. Taking this idea a step farther, consider the fact that in some cultures today, particularly agrarian or craft-oriented societies, children don't go to school with other children. Their learning takes place at home, in the fields, in service work, or in small factories. In these cultures, the model of the apprentice mentor is still very much in place. In such places, children's learned thinking occurs in an apprenticeship relationship to elders and more skilled peers. This is called guided participation learning. Now, the major difference between this type of learning and that used in Western countries is the guided participation takes place in context. Thinking processes and skills are immediately put to use in the places where the learning takes place. In contrast, most learning in the United States takes place out of context, usually inside the classroom. Where in Western cultures and in Westernized cultures, a student learns skills to be put in effect at a future workplace or a higher level of education. To study how children learn in both setting, in the 1990s, an observational study was done of children in two out of context setting in Salt Lake City and Turkey, and two in context villages setting in India and Guatemala. Researchers noted these differences. In context learning is less verbal, and adults use more explicit hands-on teaching methods. Out of context teachers use more classroom structure and verbal praise to keep students' attention on the task at hand. In measuring and comparing student strengths, these researchers noted that the traditionally in context taught students had better observational skills and were better at emulating behaviors than the out of context learners. When these skills are valued in their particular culture, these students are better prepared for success. But even in industrialized Western societies, collaborative learning has been found to be an effective educational strategy when compared to having students work on tasks alone. It has particular relevance in preparing students for the modern workplace where team performance is increasingly emphasized. Now, the psychological school of thought that has received the most research attention in the area of cognitive development since Piaget is the information processing perspective. Instead of looking at broad stages of learning, this approach focuses on the child's mental manipulation of symbols. Information processing psychologists often use the computer as a model of human thought. They believe that humans actively process the information they receive from their senses, like a computer does. Learning is what happens when our brain receives information, record it, mold it, and store it. They also examine and compare the way a computer stores and uses information with human memory and learning. One of the key differences between computers and human brain is the computer's greater capacity for processing information. This refers to how much information a person or a computer can remember and access at one time. Children gain processing capacity as they mature, but they have different capacities within each age group. For example, let's return to Piaget's conservation problem. An information processing perspective would account for a 5-year-old child's inability to understand the amount of liquid stays the same in different size containers because the child cannot process container height and width at the same time. As children mature, they can work with multiple dimensions and different sources of information. Some information processing psychologists believe that children don't add quantity to their processing capacity as they grow older. Rather, they learn to process information more efficiently. These psychologists use the example of reading and point to how hard children must work at first to sound out letters and words. But as they master the basics, their brains are freed up of making room for other learning. Thus, reading becomes an automatic skill and the child's learning process gains efficiency. Now, after a child learns to read, he has to continually read more books or other materials to get more proficient. A child with a voracious appetite for reading can speed way ahead of his same age peers in language skills. This is an example of domain-specific learning. The same thing can happen in math or a specific physical ability or sport. Practice makes perfect. When a skill set or ability is called domain general, it is one that tends to arrive in most children around the same age. Harkening back to Piaget's stages of development, these abilities don't depend on how much practice a child has had with a particular activity. They come naturally as they age. Examples of domain general abilities are the capacity to remember names and add it in your head. So, try learning Chavacano with or while thinking about basketball. Hard, isn't it? Now, the ability to focus on one stimulus without becoming distracted is the thing that makes all kind of learning possible. Newborn babies pay attention to their mother's faces and most moving objects, but certain types of attention skills are acquired with age. For example, sustained attention is the ability to focus on one thing for a continuous period. A child is reading aloud at his desk. He can hear another child reading a different page just two desks away. Will he be able to continue reading without being distracted? Children develop the ability to pay attention for longer periods of time when they can inhibit their responses to irrelevant stimuli in their environment. Sometimes, the distracting stimuli are even internal. The child wonders how soon class will break for recess. He panics at his inability to recall a particular word and loses his place. Perhaps he jumps to a conclusion before thinking about the problem he's attempting to solve. When a child succumbs to this type of internal distraction, his problem is referred to as an inability to inhibit responses. The frontal cortex of the brain is responsible for this type of executive function. Between the ages of 3 and 6, this part of a child's brain makes a major jump. The second is selective attention. And on the other hand, it's the ability to select from many factors or stimuli and to focus on only one that you want while filtering out other distractions. When there are many things going on in a child's environment, he must pick out one thing at a time to focus on. This is selective attention. Children learn different strategies to avoid distractions. They might move away from certain stimuli, or if it's an electronic gadget, turn it off. Although it sounds simple, many children experience difficulty in focusing and staying focused on their task at hand. Now, it doesn't matter how well you pay attention if you don't remember what you learn. 2 months old babies can remember something for a few days. Researchers discovered this when they taught babies to pull a string to make a crib mobile move. If placed in the crib a few days or few weeks later, a baby would typically remember how to make the mobile move again. However, if several weeks went by before getting a chance to try again, the babies would not remember. Younger children before age 6 or 7 have more literal way of remembering things. They like to remember and repeat the exact words spoken to them. Older children, like adults, tend to retain general impressions. They might remember the gist of what was said to them but not recall the conversation verbatim. This distinction between how and what younger and older children remember has been useful for understanding how children make cognitive progress. Some tasks, for example, mental arithmetic, require highly detailed verbatim representation in a child's memory. Other problem-solving tasks require only gist memories. To illustrate how memories are stored and accessed, psychologists use the model of a network of linked nodes, which you can think of as general spots or gathering spots for similar information. Several nodes might be devoted to a single topic or area. For example, an 8-year-old boy who's skateboarding might have a dozen connected nodes. One devoted to the condition of the board's wheels, while others are about street skating, stairs, flips, etc. These nodes are only activated when needed to complete a memory. Networks that are used more often are activated faster than those only occasionally used. Networks can be activated externally by an image or a comment, or internally by a thought. Now, the phrase use it or lose it is an apt description of what happens if too much time goes by since the last time skateboarding or any network of nodes in a child's memory were activated. Your long-term memory has unlimited capacity. The more long-term memory you store at any given time, the more your capacity will expand to hold an even greater quantity. The other surprising fact about long-term memories is that they are never truly forgotten. It's all in there somewhere, waiting to be accessed and then retrieved and then reactivated. there are different categories of long-term memory. You have semantic memory, which are knowledge of words and concepts. You have episodic memory, which are memories of events or day-to-day life experiences. And then you have procedural memories, memories on how to do things. For example, tying shoelace, riding the skateboard, and they are recalled without conscious or deliberate effort. Now, as a child matures, he acquires more detailed details about the person, places, or things that occupies his memory nodes. These details are added in the form of additional links to the child's existing nodes. A 2-year-old, for example, might have a node for a bird with a single linked node for sky. In comparison, a 7-year-old child's node for bird could have dozens of links to nodes denoting blue, red, large, small, water, marsh, trees, etc. Very few adults can remember an event or episodic memory that occurred before the age of 3. Psychologists have a name for this: infantile amnesia. Not remembering early life events is entirely normal. But why? Scientists have or are not sure but have come up with several possible explanations. The one is that the maturity of a baby and a toddler's frontal lobe may facilitate the memory of events associated with motor activities but not sensory and verbal cues. Another theory says that children under 3 do not have sufficiently developed sense of self to relate to and remember what happens to them. While another theory suggests that children's memories are easily reconstructed to respond to later revisions and descriptions of events that may have taken place. The original memory cues may have been replaced with these later representations. Although these explanations for forgetting early memories are plausible, there are also exceptions. Adolescents and adults appear to vividly recall certain key events from their childhoods. These are called autobiographical memories. It may be the visit to Santa Claus that made a huge impression, the fall that brought you to the emergency room for stitches, or that time your fourth grade teacher caught you passing a love note, humiliating you in the front of the class. These are the things that give us our life stories. They can be viewed as building blocks of childhood, and they can contribute to an adult's sense of self. The other type of memory important to a child's cognitive development is what she what she needs immediately in the present to learn the mental task she's working on right now. The length of time that items in working memory can remain activated is short, estimated at 30 seconds on average. Unless something is done to keep the memory alive, it will fade. For example, repeating the spelling of a word, rereading a passage of text, or practicing an addition or subtraction problem can keep a working memory fresh. That's because your working short-term memory has a limited capacity. If individual short-term representations are combined into larger chunks of memory, for example, if the letters CAT are combined into the word cat, stored space will be freed up. And then there will be more room available for new short-term representations to enter short-term memory and remain in the top of your mind. Language is many things at once. It's a tool for making emotional and social connections. It's also an engine for brain development and cognitive learning. There are 5 components to language, and each develop in a time corresponding to a child's biological and cognitive maturation. So, phonology is the sound system of a language. Different languages sound radically different from each other. A child learns the sound of his culture And then you also have morphology, the rules that govern how words are formed from sounds. It begins with babbling and become a lifetime process of learning correct pronunciations. The third is semantics, which involves understanding the meaning of words and sentences, beginning with gestures, vocabulary, grows in leaps and bounds. You also have syntax, the rules of how words are combined to produce sentences. The relations between words become grammatical knowledge. Lastly, you have pragmatics, which is the principles governing how language is to be used in social situations. These includes nuances of meaning and tone. Now, each of these components must be learned and integrated with the others, a process that typically takes a child through adolescence. So, different psychological perspectives emphasizes nature or nurture as the key drivers in as the key driver in language development. Learning theorists view a child's verbal interaction with others as all important. This consists of adults using child-directed speech in the first 2 or 3 years and babies imitating what they hear. Those that favor a biological or nature perspective on child development believe that a baby is born with special wiring for language acquisition. This device then triggers the young child's speech comprehension when he hears adults and older children speaking. Most psychologists view a child learning to speak a language as a complex interaction between nature and nurture. Rather than a special linguistic processor for language acquisition, they view normal nervous system maturation as the key for children to develop increasingly higher language abilities. The fact that they do so at about the same developmental times is a biological fact of life. Substantial evidence also points to there being sensitive periods during normal maturation when a child finds it easiest to learn different components of the language. So, one sensitive period for learning a first or second language is thought to occur before puberty. There's also evidence that different parts of the brain are used for second language learning when it occurs in childhood rather than in later adolescence or adulthood. In every period of a child's development, he takes on and usually masters a different language task. From unusual cases where individuals were unable to hear and speak during infancy and early childhood, psychologists have or has observed that many aspects of language can be learned later. The exception to this appears to be syntax or how the words are combined, which is much harder to learn later. Here are some sensitive periods that have been identified for language development. The first is pre-linguistic. This is before they're 1 year old, where babies learn that people take turn talking. Their babbling becomes more purposeful as they receive meanings through repetition. They can understand more than they can speak. And then you have the stage of one word at a time, which means that one word says it all. That's the view of most toddlers. In most cultures, a baby's first words begin with a consonant and end with a vowel. Ma, da, pa, and so on. If he's attempting a 2 or 3 syllable word such as kangaroo, he tends to stick to the syllable that emphasizes the normal speech he hears. In this case, roo. The third is the stage of simple sentence. In this stage, usually at 18 months to 2 years old, a child takes single words and combine them into simple sentences. Dada babay is an example. And then you have the preschool stage, which happens between 2.5 and 5 year olds and 5 years. Children learn to produce complex sentences. They expand their vocabularies exponentially and learn basic syntax and pragmatics. For example, they master the different uses of grammar that turn a declarative sentence into a question. They don't yet have referential communication, which allows them to differentiate when another speaker is being clear or unclear. Lastly, you have the stage of middle childhood and adolescence. In grade school and beyond, children learn exceptions and refinement to the basic rules of language they've acquired through their years. They master referential communication and will ask for clarifications of ambiguous speech. When learning to speak, young children use several primitive cognitive strategies. For example, they make inferences about new word meanings by contrasting new words with words they already know. Some of these strategies produce the right use of a word while others don't. When cognitive constraints produce challenges for a typical 2 to 3 year old speech and language comprehension, they often reflect insufficient brain maturation and cognitive development. Now, the most recent research show that a child who is exposed by the age of 3 to 2 languages has little or no difficulty becoming proficient in both. Previous research that claimed the opposite was shown to be flawed. Even when a child learns a second language sequentially and after the age of 3, it takes no more than a year for a typical 4 or 5 year old to achieve the same proficiency. Are children who speak 2 languages smarter than those who know only one? Now, the research suggests yes, there are cognitive advantages for bilingual children. They score as higher or even higher on IQ tests. They score higher than their single language peers on grammar and written prose. They also perform better on non-linguistic tasks such as the ability to maintain selective attention and resist distraction. Why might these linguistic and cognitive advantages exist? Linguists speculate that bilingual children's ability to inhibit distractions come from their advanced training in adapting to a variety of situations to use the appropriate language. Another hypothesis is that by learning 2 languages at a younger age, a child better understands the arbitrary nature of words and how sentences are constructed. This may predispose them to remember parts and rules of language because they know they have to tell them apart. So, in conclusion, the order of myelination or strengthening of a child's brain's neurons determines what she learns first, second, or third, with cognitive development the last area to occur after motor and sensory. Then attention and memory are prerequisites to all cognitive development. We've also learned that learning a language is a complex interaction between nature and nurture with special periods of sensitivity allowing leaps in learning. We also learned that learning 2 languages at an early age can increase a child's IQ and school performance. So, this has been Dex Kamitan, and thank you for watching.